Welcome to Sports Live Media on YouTube. It's your guy, Sports Live, broadcasting live today, July 27th, 2025. We are going to do Major League Baseball games, my perspective, and it'll be for games that will be taking place July 28th, 29th, 30th, and 31st of July of 2025. We will go over the who is playing that day, who the starting pitchers are, any other pertinent information that is available, and then I will make picks on who I think will win those games. After doing so, we'll also go over the Major League Baseball standings that will be, that are in place for the win-loss record that all Major League Baseball teams have through the conclusion of their games as of yesterday, July 26th of 2025. Can y'all hear me out there in YouTube land? All right, so for the games on July 28th of 2025, you have Toronto versus Baltimore, 5:35 p.m. Central. Chris Bassett versus Zach Eflin. You have Arizona versus Detroit, 5:40 p.m. Central. Eduardo Rodriguez versus Troy Melton. You have Colorado playing Cleveland, 5:40 p.m. Bradley Blaylock versus Slade Ciccone or Ciccone. You have Tampa Bay versus the New York Yankees, which is Drew Musin versus Undecided, 6:05 p.m. The times that I list will be in Central Time. You have Los Angeles Dodgers versus Cincinnati, 6:10 p.m. Yoshinobu Yamamoto versus Chase Burns. You have Atlanta versus Kansas City, which will be at 6:40 p.m. Undecided versus Rich Hill. Boston versus Minnesota, 6:40 p.m. Richard Fitz versus Simeon Woods Richardson. You have the Chicago Cubs versus Milwaukee, 6:40 p.m. Matthew Boyd versus Jacob Missorowski, and that's the Chicago Cubs. You have Philadelphia versus the Chicago White Sox, 6:40 p.m. Christopher Sanchez versus Davis Martin. Miami versus St. Louis, 6:45 p.m. Edward Cabrera versus Eric Fed. You have Washington versus Houston, 7:10 p.m. Brad Lord versus Undecided. And that's at 7:10 p.m. Can y'all hear me out there in YouTube land? You have Texas versus Los Angeles Angels, 8:38 p.m. Jacob deGrom versus Undecided. You have the New York Mets versus San Diego, 8:40 p.m. Frankie Montas versus Dylan Cease. Pittsburgh versus San Francisco, 8:45 p.m. Mitch Keller versus Undecided. Let's see. Seattle versus the Athletics, 9:05 p.m. Luis Castillo versus J.P. Sears. So for the games on Monday, July 28th of 2025, here are my picks for who I think is going to win the games. Toronto defeats Baltimore. Arizona will defeat Detroit. Colorado will defeat Cleveland. Tampa Bay will defeat the New York Yankees. Los Angeles Dodgers will defeat Cincinnati. Atlanta defeats Kansas City. Boston will defeat Minnesota. Chicago Cubs will defeat Milwaukee. Philadelphia defeats the Chicago White Sox. Miami will defeat St. Louis. Washington will defeat Houston. The Los Angeles Angels will lose to Texas. The New York Mets will beat San Diego. You'll have Pittsburgh defeat San Francisco. And you'll have Seattle defeating the Athletics. So I do not have the money line or the over-under on any of these games, so we'll just kind of go with what we have there. On July 29th, you have Toronto versus Baltimore, and it looks like there's going to be a doubleheader that day. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. The one game is 11:35 a.m. with Undecided versus Charlie Morton. And then the other game that is at 5:35 p.m. on that day, they have no information available on the pitching matchup, and that's at 5:35 p.m. You'll have Arizona versus Detroit, 5:40 p.m. Brandon Pfaadt versus Reese Olson. You have Colorado versus Cleveland, undecided versus Logan Allen, 5:40 p.m. Tampa Bay versus the New York Yankees, 6:05 p.m. Let's see, Taj Bradley versus Max Fried. The Los Angeles Dodgers versus Cincinnati, 6:10 p.m. Tyler Glasnow versus Nick Lodolo. You have Atlanta versus Kansas City, Spencer Strider versus Seth Lugo. Okay, you have Boston versus Minnesota, 6:40 p.m. Lucas Giolito versus Chris Paddock. You have the Chicago Cubs versus Milwaukee, 6:40 p.m. Colin Ray versus Quinn Priester. Philadelphia versus the Chicago White Sox, Jesus Luzardo versus Jonathan Cannon, 6:40 p.m. Miami versus St. Louis, 6:45 p.m. Sandy Alcantara versus Andre Paliante. Washington versus Houston. You have Michael Soroka versus Undecided, 7:10 p.m. You have Texas versus Los Angeles Angels, 8:38 p.m. Patrick Corbin versus Yusei Kikuchi. You have the New York Mets versus San Diego, 8:40 p.m. Sean Mania versus Yu Darvish. Pittsburgh versus San Francisco, 8:45 p.m. Bailey Falter versus Undecided. You have Seattle versus the Athletics, which is 9:05 p.m. Logan Evans versus Luis Severino. So in the games on July 29th, I have the Athletics defeating Seattle, San Francisco beating Pittsburgh, San Diego defeating the New York Mets, the Los Angeles Angels defeating Texas, Houston defeats Washington, St. Louis defeats Miami, Chicago will defeat Philadelphia, Milwaukee will defeat Chicago Cubs, and in the Chicago game versus Philadelphia, that's the Chicago White Sox, I'll have Minnesota defeating Boston. And then, let's see, I'll have Kansas City defeating Atlanta, Cincinnati defeating the Los Angeles Dodgers, the New York Yankees defeating Tampa Bay, Cleveland defeating Colorado, Detroit defeating Arizona, and I'll have Baltimore defeating Toronto in both games they're playing that day. So next, we have the games for July 30th. July 30th, 2025, and those games are as follows. You have Toronto versus Baltimore, 11:35 a.m. Jose Barrios versus Dean Kremer. You have Arizona versus Detroit, 12:10 p.m. Ryan Nelson versus Tariq Skubal. Boston versus Minnesota, 12:10 p.m. Brayan Bello versus Undecided. Atlanta versus Kansas City. You have 1:10 p.m., which will be Joey Wentz versus Michael Wacha. Chicago Cubs versus Milwaukee, 1:10 p.m. Shota Imanaga versus Freddie Peralta. Philadelphia versus the Chicago White Sox, 1:10 p.m. Let's see, Tajuan Walker versus Adrian Hauser. Washington versus Houston, 1:10 p.m. Mitchell Parker versus Undecided. Pittsburgh versus San Francisco, 2:45 p.m. Mike Burrows versus Undecided. The New York Mets versus San Diego, 3:10 p.m. Clay Holmes versus Nick Pivetta, 3:10 p.m. on that one. Then you'll have Colorado versus Cleveland, 5:40 p.m. Kyle Freeland versus Gavin Williams. You have Tampa Bay versus the New York Yankees, 6:05 p.m. Zach Littell versus Will Warren. The Los Angeles Dodgers versus Cincinnati, 6:10 p.m. Emmett Sheehan versus Nick Martinez. The Tampa Bay New York Yankees game is 6:05 p.m. You have Miami versus St. Louis, 6:45 p.m. Cal Quantrill versus Sonny Gray. Texas versus the Los Angeles Angels, 8:38 p.m. Kumar Rocker versus Jose Soriano. Then you have Seattle versus the Athletics, 9:05 p.m. Undecided versus Jeffrey Springs. So here are my picks now for who I think will win the games on Wednesday, July 30th. I have Baltimore defeating Toronto, Detroit defeating Arizona, Minnesota defeats Boston, Kansas City defeats Atlanta. Milwaukee defeats Chicago Cubs. Chicago White Sox wins over Philadelphia. Houston will defeat Washington. San Francisco defeats Pittsburgh. San Diego will defeat the New York Mets. Cleveland will defeat Colorado. The New York Yankees will defeat Tampa Bay. Los Angeles will lose to Cincinnati. St. Louis will defeat Miami. Los Angeles Angels will defeat Texas. And the Athletics will defeat Seattle. So now we've got the games that are on July 31st. You have Tampa Bay versus the New York Yankees, 12:05 p.m. Ryan Pepiot versus Marcus Stroman. You have Atlanta versus Cincinnati, 6:10 p.m. Grant Holmes versus Andrew Abbott. You have Texas versus Seattle, 8:40 p.m. Undecided versus George Kirby. So the games for July 31st, I have the New York Yankees defeating Tampa Bay, Atlanta defeating Cincinnati, and Texas defeating Seattle. So just a quick summary of the games that we have. For Monday, July 28th, here's who I have winning the games. I have Toronto defeating Baltimore, Arizona defeats Detroit, Colorado defeats Cleveland, Tampa Bay defeats the New York Yankees, Los Angeles Dodgers defeats Cincinnati, Atlanta defeats Kansas City, Boston defeats Minnesota, Chicago Cubs defeats Milwaukee, Philadelphia beats the Chicago White Sox, Miami defeats St. Louis, Houston loses to Washington, Texas defeats Los Angeles Angels, the New York Mets defeat San Diego, Pittsburgh will defeat San Francisco, Seattle will defeat the Athletics. On July 29th, I have Baltimore defeating Toronto in the two games of the doubleheader. I have Baltimore winning both of those. I have Detroit beating Arizona, Cleveland defeating Colorado, New York Yankees defeats Tampa Bay, Cincinnati defeats Los Angeles, Kansas City will defeat Atlanta, Minnesota defeats Boston, Milwaukee defeats Chicago Cubs, the Chicago White Sox defeats Philadelphia, St. Louis defeats Miami, Washington loses to Houston, Los Angeles Angels defeats Texas, San Diego defeats New York Mets, San Francisco defeats Pittsburgh, the Athletics defeats Seattle. For Wednesday, July 30th, I have Baltimore defeating Toronto, I have Detroit defeating Arizona, I have Minnesota defeating Boston, Kansas City defeats Atlanta, Milwaukee defeats the Chicago Cubs, Chicago White Sox defeats Philadelphia, Houston defeats Washington, San Francisco defeats Pittsburgh, San Diego defeats the New York Mets, I have Cincinnati defeating Colorado, I have the New York Yankees defeating Tampa Bay, I have Cincinnati defeats the Los Angeles Dodgers, St. Louis defeats Miami, Los Angeles will defeat Texas, the Athletics defeats Seattle. And for July 31st, I have the New York Yankees defeating Tampa Bay, Atlanta defeating Cincinnati, and Texas defeating Seattle. All right, so now here is the fun part. This is the win-loss record for Major League Baseball as it stands right now. These win-loss records are as of the games that were completed yesterday, July 26th of 2025. The win-loss records are as follows. Toronto, 63 wins, 42 losses. New York Yankees, 56 wins, 48 losses. Boston, 56 wins, 50 losses. Tampa Bay, 53 wins, 53 losses. Baltimore, 47 wins, 58 losses. Detroit, 60 wins, 46 losses. Cleveland, 52 wins, 52 losses. Kansas City, 51 wins, 54 losses. Minnesota, 50 wins, 54 losses. Chicago White Sox, 38 wins, 67 losses. Houston, 60 wins, 45 losses. Seattle, 56 wins, 49 losses. Texas, 55 wins, 50 losses. Los Angeles Angels, 50 wins, 55 losses. The Athletics, 45 wins, 62 losses. New York Mets, 61 wins, 44 losses. Philadelphia, 60 wins, 44 losses. Miami, 50 wins, 53 losses. Atlanta, 49 wins, 59 losses. Washington, 42 wins, 62 losses. Chicago Cubs and Milwaukee both have the same win-loss record with 61 wins, 43 losses. Cincinnati, 56 wins, 50 losses. St. Louis, 54 wins, 52 losses. Pittsburgh, 44 wins, 62 losses. Los Angeles Dodgers, 61 wins, 49 losses. San Diego, 56 wins, 49 losses. San Francisco, 54 wins, 51 losses. Arizona, 51 wins, 55 losses. Colorado, 27 wins and 78 losses. So there you have it. That is Major League Baseball, my perspective. Who I have picked to win the games for July 28th, 29th, 30th, and 31st. We went over who is playing, who the starting pitchers are, and then my thoughts on who's going to win those games. We then just summarized the win-loss record for all games completed as of July 26, 2025, where each and every Major League Baseball team stands. So thank you for taking the time to hear this on Sports Live Media today. I do greatly appreciate the time. And Eagles world champions for Elvis. That's NFL football. We will get to NFL football talk when it gets a little closer to the NFL season, but thank you very much. I do appreciate it. If you will, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell so you can be made aware of when I'm doing these live streams, when I have breaking news in the sports world, when I have sports action videos, when I have sports education videos. If you wish to subscribe to the channel, you can do so in two different ways. One, you go to www.youtube.com, the slash symbol, the at symbol, SPORTSLOV, or you can go to the YouTube search tab and type in Bob Amin. That's BOBAMIN. You'll know it's me because I have Sports Live Media burned into a basketball as my avatar. I'm also on Twitter X. My handle there is at BobAmin16. That's the at symbol, BOBAMIN 16. Just an announcement, we will be doing college football and NFL football live streams when those seasons start. College football live stream will start sometime in mid-August and will go weekly. NFL, we will do that as time permits, and we'll do that as the season gets closer to happening. So we will have other live streams regarding live sports action, and I'll let you know when those are, as it's appropriate to do so. We will continue to have sports action videos and other sports education videos, in the coming days, and I'll let you know when that's coming as well. Excuse me. So if there's no questions, comments, thank you again for tuning in to this broadcast today. I'm Bob Amin with Sports Live Media. Thank you. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a wonderful day.